In 2 or 3 months from now, is it possible that under the orders of Vladimir Putin, some of the top generals in the Russian army will be taken to the side and filled with bullets courtesy of a Putin-enlisted firing squad? Is mutiny within the Russian ranks on the way? Is Putin even thinking about using a tactical nuke in his home country, no less? This might sound utterly fantastical, but that's what some of the US media was saying recently. Is there any truth to it, or is Russia playing some kind of mind game? The battlefield is one thing, but there's also a war of propaganda wrapped around the bloody conflict in Ukraine, with all sides showing themselves to be adept at constructing narratives from a palette of truths, half-truths, and outright lies. You have to admit, mutiny, executions of top generals, and nuclear strikes aren't exactly small stories, but are they tall stories? The reason we're talking about this is because of Yevgeny Prigozhin, a rich Russian oligarch, a mercenary, and at times a misinformation maverick. He's the guy talking about mutiny and firing squads and nuclear weapon use. Prigozhin is reportedly the chief farmer of Russia's infamous troll farms that have assiduously worked to plant narratives Russia hopes will grow into people's beliefs, especially American people. This is partly why it might be better to treat what he says with a pinch of salt. And then again, maybe Prigozhin is just cracked up under all that stress of fighting, and maybe he's such a maverick that he doesn't mind dissing the commander-in-chief, Mr. Putin. He does, after all, have quite the colorful past, which might encourage a person to believe that Prigozhin just doesn't give a damn. Maybe he'll state the truth regardless of what Putin thinks about it. We need to know more about him and his relationship with Putin before we consider the truthfulness of his words. In 1981, when Prigozhin was just 20, he was arrested and charged with a litany of crimes, including burglary, panhandling, prostitution, gambling, and the nasty-sounding crime of using minors to live parasitically. He was a drunk, a wayward kid from the wrong side of the tracks who, after spending 9 years behind bars, ended up selling hot dogs with his mother and stepfather at the local flea market in Leningrad. The boy did well, and as the years passed, he got involved in the grocery store business with a school friend. The two then opened the old Customs House, what was said to be St. Petersburg's first elite restaurant. Then they spent $400,000, a lot of money in the 90s, to convert and remodel an old ship, creating another fancy restaurant, this one called New Island. Prigozhin is obviously a bit ashamed of his criminal past. News reports show that he's filed 15 different lawsuits against Yandex, a search engine mainly used in Russia, in an attempt to rub his name off the internet under the right to be forgotten laws. On a summer's day in 2001, he met someone who would change his life forever. President Vladimir Putin walked into his New Island restaurant with the then French President Jacques Chirac. A year later, Putin dined on that transformed ship with none other than US President George W. Bush. Putin even had a birthday party there. He and Prigozhin became close. Much later, Prigozhin led a catering contract worth over $1 billion to feed Putin's soldiers. Later, Prigozhin became the head of Russia's infamous Internet Research Agency, an outfit that is basically a troll farm, writing stories that Russia hopes will turn into full-blown narratives, planting seeds Russia hopes will create disharmony and disunity in the USA. We're not going to do a full bio here, so let's just say that Putin was mightily impressed with Prigozhin's life story and attendant successes, and the two hit it off. They became as thick as thieves. It was a match made in heaven, or hell, depending on where you stand. Just keep this in mind as you watch the rest of the video. Are these two good friends now virtual enemies? Is Prigozhin sincere when he says what he says about everything going wrong in Ukraine? Most people have heard of Prigozhin not because Western presidents once wolfed down expensive wine and foie gras at his maritime-themed restaurant, but because he leads Putin's private army, the Wagner Group. This is not part of the giant Russian army, although it receives equipment from the Russian Ministry of Defense. The group doesn't just provide mercenaries, it works with Russia's military intelligence agency too. It's incredibly useful for Putin, not just on the battlefield. It has long fingers in a lot of pies. In the words of Russia's main intelligence directorate, GRU, former Chief of Staff Nikolai Makarov, such formidable and dangerous private military companies can be used for delicate missions abroad. Wagner is one of few such mercenary companies that have been involved in conflicts around the world in the name of defending Mother Russia. In 2018, it was discovered that the Wagner Group shared a facility with the 10th Separate Special Purpose Brigade of Russia's GRU, located in Molkino in Russia's Krasnodar district. The Wagner Group is a lot more than hired mercenaries and released convicts who can shoot a gun, even though the reported 50,000 soldiers on its payroll are currently useful in that regard. So we know Prigozhin and Putin are pretty close. The level of trust Putin awards him is as high as it gets. There's a lot we don't know about the Wagner Group, but we know enough to understand it's very important. That's why it can be hard to believe that not long ago Prigozhin said in a video that he expects in 2 or 3 months there's a chance that Russia will suffer losses and some of Russia's leading generals will be given the firing squad treatment. As we said, he also talked about Putin using a nuke. We'll come back to the nuke talk later. For now, let's focus on Prigozhin's most notable battle in Ukraine, the Battle of Bakhmut. The eastern Ukrainian town was home to what's been called the longest and bloodiest fight in Russia's war in Ukraine so far. The place has been flattened. The landscape has been turned into a scene perfect for a Hollywood dystopian movie. Bakhmut is the depressing result of a war of attrition, the kind of war some people believe suits Russia, yet others say it'll bring Russia's doom. Depending on which analyst you're reading, you might hear that Bakhmut was a trap set by either Ukraine or Russia to weaken the other side. Pro-Ukrainian pundits of this war will say that Russian combat power was reduced in Bakhmut, all the while Ukraine was just waiting for Western weapons to arrive. In this case, Ukraine set the trap. But you could also make the case for Russia holding out until Ukraine's forces were severely weakened. At the same time, Russia preserved its natural army and let the mercenaries do all the work. Russia lost a lot of convicts, which was no big loss. The question is, which side actually lost in this battle? Whose resources were dangerously depleted while the other side went about strengthening other facets of its forces, ready for an all-out attack later? Was the so-called pit of death of Bakhmut as strategically insignificant as many media outlets portrayed it? First, it's doubtful that Bakhmut was as strategically insignificant as was made out. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been fought over the way it was. It was reported that for Ukraine, Bakhmut provided a unique opportunity to kill a lot of Russians and weakened Russia's forces. But for Russia, the fighting was purely symbolic. In this case, it was a huge mistake for Russia, but that's only one way of looking at it. It's hard to believe that maybe 20 or 30,000 Russian men have died because Mr. Putin is afraid of a symbolic loss. Then again, many of the men fighting were convicts, which makes them expendable in the eyes of Putin. Reports state that Ukraine also lost big, although again, different sources paint vastly different pictures. Some sources say way less than Russia, others say just as many Ukrainian soldiers died. Ukraine certainly put a lot of men there. It's thought in total Bakhmut saw 37 Ukrainian brigades, 2 regiments, and 18 battalions. Would Ukraine have sacrificed so many men? Some think 20 to 30,000 just like Russia as a way to wait for weapons? In one of his rants, Prigozhin said that Wagner had lost 20,000 men in Bakhmut, but he also said that 50,000 Ukrainians had been killed in action. This was after his famous rant where he threatened to pull his men out of Bakhmut unless they received more support from Russia. Later, he extolled what he said was Ukraine's high level of organizational skills, a high level of training, a high level of intelligence. He added they have different types of weapons, and what is most important, they can easily and successfully work with all systems, Soviet, NATO systems, you name it. He was basically telling the world that his enemy was superior. In fact, he blasted Putin and other Russian military bigwigs so much that there's talk that he's trying to get the people behind him so he can make a play to replace Putin. His men have videoed him with their phones, showing him enlisting prisoners to fight or proudly walking through corpse-filled streets in Bakhmut, looking like a fearless soldier. Was this just propaganda to get the Russian people on his side so he might oust Putin? If so, why didn't Putin just have him killed? Not only that, he's criticized high-ranking officials in Russia for corruption, saying such men swan around in Dubai as their children avoid the draft and good men die on the battlefield. Analysts are calling this the Prigozhin brand. One of his latest comments was, "We are at such a point that we could bleeping lose Russia. That is the main problem. We need to impose martial law," he said. He concluded his rant by saying that the scenario for us will not be good, and that is why we need to get ready for an arduous war. It's hard to know what to believe. The New Yorker interviewed Ukrainian men on the front line in Bakhmut who said they were totally outgunned. Some reports show that Russia had superiority in artillery. In February, a former U.S. Marine who was in Bakhmut said that men on the front line had a life expectancy of just a few hours. It's very likely that both sides suffered a similar number of casualties, although most of Russia's casualties were those former prisoners. Nonetheless, just the other day, a soldier from Ukraine's 3rd Assault Brigade said the Russians had been pushed back. Still, he said Ukraine is still using Soviet-era weapons that date back to when his parents were his age. More weapons and Russia could be again pushed out, he said. Prigozhin opened his mouth again the other day and said some things that could be construed as shocking. He said the Russian army, the men that had arrived in Bakhmut after his Wagner men had secured the city, were suffering heavy losses. He explained, "Now part of the settlement of Berkivka has already been lost. The troops are quietly running away. Disgrace." Berkivka, which is located about 2 miles northwest of Bakhmut, was taken by Wagner in February. Prigozhin was furious that the Russian army lost it. All that hard work for nothing. So he believed the Russian army was much weaker than his mercenaries, and he let it be known. He went further than that, saying the Ministry of Defense's main goal is to pretend that everything is okay and that we are advancing. In reality, what is happening now will result in significant tactical defeats in 2 weeks' time. Time and time again, Prigozhin has criticized Russia's defense minister Sergei Shoigu, as well as throwing fire at the country's chief of the general staff, Valery Gerasimov. If things couldn't get any crazier, in June, Prigozhin's mercenaries captured the Russian commander of the 72nd Brigade, Lieutenant Colonel Roman Venivitin. They interrogated him with the camera switched on, of course, and made him admit that he'd been drunk on the job and had ordered his troops to fire on Wagner men in a convoy as they were leaving Bakhmut. Venivitin admitted that he didn't much like the Wagner guys and then issued an apology. Prigozhin, who we should remember is a master of misinformation, said he'd found bombs that the Russian Defense Ministry had planted, bombs that were intended to blow him up. In what sounds like a movie called Laurel and Hardy Go to War, or maybe Carry On Ukraine, Prigozhin then said that the Wagner Group would not sign any more contracts with Russia's forces. It was like a playground fight, all on video for the world to see, which made Putin's Russia seem imbecilic. It looked like Russia's war effort was falling apart from the inside, with Prigozhin gladly airing Russia's dirty laundry in public. Then it got even more ridiculous. Prigozhin called the generals smelly scumbags, which would be funny if it weren't for the fact that thousands of men are dying and Ukrainians are seeing their towns turn to rubble. He then screamed, "Shoigu, Gerasimov, I urge you to come to the front, raise your pistols at your men to make them go forward. Come on, you can." Putin, meanwhile, doesn't seem concerned about this. But why? You'd think he'd be furious and have his good friend Prigozhin torn to pieces by a firing squad, something he could do quite easily. One analyst believes the reason Putin lets the mud fly is to keep the army on its toes. He added, the presence of Prigozhin's media persona not only receives acceptance but is even encouraged. Still, the Western press says that for the most part, Prigozhin's meltdowns are a sign that Moscow's war machine is in tatters, on the verge of a breakdown. CNN said this is great news for Ukraine as the country moves along, if slowly, with its offensive. A CNN reporter said gleefully, "If Prigozhin didn't exist, I think the Ukrainians would be wanting to make him up." Then again, is CNN seeing the bigger picture here? Are we being advertised a narrative? Is Russia really that cartoonishly incompetent? Or has this narrative actually been made up by people who excel in doing such things? On the face of it, there does indeed look like there's been a total breakdown of order. In one of his latest videos posted on the Telegram app, Prigozhin said Moscow will execute top generals for losing Ukrainian territory. He explained, "I think we are 2 or 3 months away from the firing squad," meaning after Ukraine mows through Russia's forces like a hot knife through columns of butter. Prigozhin went as far as to say that Russia might use nuclear weapons in Belgorod, a border town where there are pro-Ukrainian Russian volunteer units. This would mean Putin nuking his own country, upsetting the international community and possibly starting a nuclear war. If some of you think Prigozhin's latest rants sound like theater, you wouldn't be alone. We don't imagine US intelligence watched that video with any amount of concern or interest, certainly not enough interest to make any strategic decisions over. Nonetheless, you have to ask the question, if this is a close friend of Putin, a trusted ally really vying to get the Russian people on his side and perhaps replace Putin. After all, the videos look real to Russians too. Has Prigozhin really lost the plot? Is there so much disunity and chaos on the front line that Ukraine will walk right through this next offensive? If Prigozhin is telling the truth, that should happen, but are things really as bad as he makes out? The answer, according to some analysts, is that it definitely won't happen like that. Ukraine won't just walk right through Russia's troops with ease while their leaders squabble like children. Many of these people think this will be a protracted war of attrition. Some of them believe Russia's in a better position to win a war of attrition since it has more soldiers, especially after Ukraine lost so many of its soldiers fighting in Bakhmut. Others say Ukraine is better suited to a war of attrition, but no one's walking through anyone. But you have to ask then, what the hell is Prigozhin up to? Some pundits have said his ranting is related to the Russian expression maskirovka. This literally means mask or masking, but in military and strategic sense, we can say it's all about confusing the enemy and its supporters. An analyst explained, it's a public spectacle to shape the perception of those external actors watching. After all, while Prigozhin might look dumb, life is not a Hollywood movie. He's obviously very smart, and he obviously has a background in psychological operations. Russia's pretending its army is in disarray is not exactly a genius bit of misdirection. Still, it seems that some people believe it. Much of the Western media has ran with the narrative, reporting it to make Ukraine look like it's on the verge of winning the conflict. In short, Prigozhin might be orchestrating an exaggerated disarray that Putin wants Ukraine and the West to believe, because believing your enemy is weak when it is not is a powerful thing in a war. The Western media might be selling the disarray as real, so people believe the war is almost won when it certainly isn't. It's very hard to discern what is real in this war, and anyone who says they know exactly what the truth is would be lying. Just recently, the Kakhovka Dam in the Kherson region was blown up, a dam already in the hands of the Russians. This is a new kind of threat to Ukrainian civilians. Tens of thousands of people had to be evacuated, while flooding destroys not just houses but agriculture. It's a terrible thing to happen to the Ukrainian people, with the whole event being called an ecocide. It makes Russia look really bad. But who did it? The same question we asked about the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, and we got different answers, with accusations being thrown around depending on what media and, more importantly, what genuine experts you read. Ukrainian security forces said they had proof, a phone call they intercepted which suggested the Russians blew up the dam. A spokesman said the invaders wanted to blackmail Ukraine by blowing up the dam and staging a man-made disaster in the south of our country. Poland came right out and said blowing up that dam should result in more sanctions against Russia. The US just said it's constantly monitoring the situation. Russia has denied it, of course. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said the attack was planned and carried out by order received from Kyiv from the Kyiv regime, with the aim to deprive Crimea of water and to distract from what's happening on the battlefield. There's a video that has been making the rounds on social media that shows a Ukrainian blogger talking to an alleged Russian soldier, with the soldier saying that the Russian army mined the Kakhovka Dam, although that evidence is weak. There's no proof that the guy is even a soldier. Some have said he's actually a Ukrainian impersonator named Yehor. Then you have the other side of the tale. In December 2022, the Washington Post published an article in which a Ukrainian commander talks about blowing up dams. The Post wrote, "The Ukrainians," he said, "even conducted a test strike with HIMARS launcher on one of the floodgates at the Nova Kakhovka Dam, making 3 holes in the metal to see if the Dnieper's water could be raised enough to stymie Russian crossings but not flood nearby villages. The test was a success," Kovalchuk said, "but the step remained a last resort." You have to ask which side the blowing up of the dam serves the most. The answer is very likely the side that did it, despite what else you might hear. It's very possible that Prigozhin's prediction of the imminent collapse of Russian forces and subsequent executions of generals by firing squad, or even that nuclear attack, won't come true. If it happens, we'll be shocked. Prigozhin and Putin might just be playing games here. It seems Ukraine has certainly advanced in its offensive. We've seen videos of flags being raised in different liberated towns and villages across the front, but these successes, at least when we started making this video, have been small. The day we started making the video, Putin said Ukraine's offensive is a failure, telling a bunch of war correspondents that Ukraine had suffered catastrophic losses. Meanwhile, Ukraine said it had just killed 680 Russian soldiers and taken out 8 tanks and an air defense system. Putin then had his shot at the narrative and said, Ukraine, lost over 160 tanks, we lost 54 tanks, and some of them are subject to restoration and repair. He said since June 4th, Ukraine has lost 10 times more soldiers than Russia had. And back and forth the story goes on like this, with the narrative changing shape like 10,000 birds in a giant murmuration. While the soundtrack in the background is Prigozhin mad as a hatter, either away with the fairies or actually angry or just playing his part in this misinformation operation as Putin smiles on in his Moscow office. Right now, it's too early to tell with any confidence what's true and not true when it comes to many matters involving Ukraine. It's likely this war will go on for a long time to come, and everything we hear needs to be scrutinized. The truth is out there, but it's never delivered to us in bite-sized parcels that makes everything seem very simple. Read the news like you're trying to complete a difficult puzzle, reading into angles and counter angles as if you're playing chess with a grandmaster, because things really are rarely as simple as they're reported. Now you need to watch why Russia will run out of soldiers before Ukraine, or watch real reason why Nazi officers fled to Argentina after World War II.